During Christmas, I bought my family a gift certificate for a 5-star hotel stay in Hawaii, but my mother threw it in the trash. "You're nothing. Even your gifts are worthless." I said nothing, but the next day I canceled their car loan. A week later, their car was repossessed. It wasn't an impulsive decision. It was the result of 29 years of build-up, 29 years of being treated like a tool rather than a son. When I looked around that fancy Christmas dinner table and saw no one, not my father, not my 2 younger brothers David and Matt, stand up for me, I knew something had to change. They all sat silent, eyes down, allowing this cruelty to continue as it had my entire life. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat there, tamping down the storm raging inside and memorizing this moment, the last moment I would let them take advantage of me. And that was just the first step in my silent revolution. My name is Jacob. I'm 29, working as both a mechanic and a night warehouse supervisor. Not because I love working to exhaustion or enjoy sleep deprivation. I work 2 jobs because I have no choice. At least that's what my parents made me believe since I was young. My story isn't a new one. It's as old as time, the forgotten child, the one sacrificed for the better siblings. In my family, that's David and Matt, my younger brothers. They're successful engineers, making 6 figures, living in fancy houses and apartments, traveling Europe, and never worrying about money a day in their lives. I still remember the evening when I was 17, sitting at the kitchen table with my father, college applications spread before me. I had good enough grades for a decent state school, not Stanford or MIT where my brothers would go, but somewhere I could grow, learn, have a future. "You don't have the academic disposition, Jacob," my father said, not looking at me, rubbing his temple as if it was his head that hurt from my dreams. "We need to focus resources where they'll be best utilized." By resources, he meant money. By best utilized, he meant not on me. "But I can do it," I said, my voice shrinking to a whisper. "I've been accepted and—" "Jacob," he interrupted, his voice firm but not angry. That was the worst part, the calm disappointment, as if he'd expected me not to understand. "Your brothers have real potential. They're going to do great things. You're good with your hands. That's your gift. Why waste it on college?" I didn't argue further. At that point, I believed him. I believed that was all I deserved. So instead of college, I went to work. I started with car repairs, then the night shift at the warehouse. And I paid. Boy, did I pay. Money for the dishwasher when my mother's broke. Money for parts when Dad's truck needed fixing, no charge for labor since I did that for free. Rent money when David needed help before his first big promotion. Tuition money when Matt's scholarship wasn't enough. Always me. Always my money. And no matter how much I did, how much I contributed, it was never enough. I was never enough. Last Christmas, I decided to do something really special. For once in my life, I wanted to show them I wasn't the failure they always thought. I wanted to make them proud, a childish desire that neglected children like me never really outgrow. For 6 months, I saved. I cut back on meals, declined hangouts with friends, and worked so much overtime my coworkers thought I lived at the workplace. All to afford a Hawaiian vacation package for the entire family, a week at a 5-star resort, including airfare, luxury rooms, and activities. I still remember the excitement when I placed that envelope under the Christmas tree. I imagined their smiles, perhaps even the hug I rarely received. Maybe this would be the moment everything changed. Maybe they'd finally see I was more than just a walking wallet. I was so naive. When it came time for my gift, my hands trembled as I handed the envelope to my mother. She opened it, quickly read the contents of the gift certificate, and in her eyes, I saw something worse than disappointment. I saw contempt. Without a word, she crumpled the gift certificate, tossed it in the nearby trash, and uttered the words that would haunt me forever. "You're nothing. Even your gifts are worthless." The room fell silent. My father looked away. David and Matt exchanged awkward glances but said nothing. Not one of them defended me. In that moment, something inside me shattered, not my heart, but the chains that had bound me to them for 29 years. I'd spent my whole life trying to make them love me, trying to be a son, a brother they would be proud of. I'd sacrificed my happiness, my future, and my finances for them, and in return, what did I get? Contempt. I said nothing. I didn't cry, didn't yell, didn't argue. I just sat there, silent, as the party continued as if nothing had happened. But inside, a fire had been lit, and it would never go out. I went home after the Christmas dinner, my small apartment quiet and cold. I sat in the darkness, staring at my phone screen, where my banking app was displayed. There was a loan I was paying, the loan for my parents' new car. They couldn't get approved because their credit was too poor, so I had co-signed. As always, they promised to pay me back, and as always, they never did. Every month, money was withdrawn from my account to pay for a car I was never allowed to drive. My fingers hovered over the screen, pausing on the cancel automatic payment button. I'd been here before, had considered it, but never had the courage. They're my family, I told myself. I can't do this to them. But then I remembered the gift certificate in the trash. I remembered my mother's eyes looking at me with disgust. I remembered my father unable to look at me. I remembered David and Matt's awkward glances. You're nothing. I pressed that button. Then I locked my phone, drank a whiskey, and went to bed with a strange serenity. A week later, the texts started coming in. Jacob, the car's gone. Call the bank and fix this now. My mother. I almost laughed. Not our car, not Dad's car, just the car, as if it had magically disappeared into thin air rather than been repossessed because someone forgot I was the one paying for it. I ignored that text. 10 minutes later, another one arrived. Are you serious? You know your father needs that car. He has doctor's appointments. He's stressed enough as it is. Of course, she didn't mention the fact that I was the one who drove him to most of those appointments, often taking time off work and losing income to do so. Then came the explosion of the family group chat. David, dude, fix this. It's not a big deal. Matt, Mom's freaking out. Do you really think this is necessary? Mom, you're so selfish and cruel, after everything we've done for you. That last line stopped me cold. Everything they'd done for me? I put the phone down and stared into space. Memories flooded in like an unstoppable tide. Summer when I was 14. I had my first job at a gas station a few blocks from home. I hadn't asked for the job, my father had arranged it without consulting me. I remember the joy of my friends as they gathered at the public pool, while I stood in 100-degree heat, wiping windshields and pumping gas. First payday, I was excited and proud. I dreamed of buying a new comic book series, maybe a video game if I saved enough. But when I got home, my mother was waiting, a piece of paper in hand. $200 a month, she said, handing me the paper. It was a list of expenses, rent, food, utilities contributions I was now responsible for. You live here, don't you? She said when she saw my confused expression. So I gave her the money, I always gave it. Meanwhile, David and Matt got to play sports, attend summer camps, and take SAT prep courses. Neither of them had to contribute a dime. One night when I was 15, I came home late after covering a shift for a sick coworker. The house was dark except for the dim glow from the TV in the living room. My father sat on the couch, a beer in hand. You're getting lazier, Jacob, he said without looking at me. I stood there, still smelling of gasoline and sweat, too tired to speak. Matt and David study hard, they'll be successful. You just work at a gas station. I remember feeling so small then, not because of my job, but because it seemed no matter what I did, I was never enough. Never worth being proud of. Then came graduation. When David graduated from college, my parents threw a massive party, food catered by a fancy restaurant, custom banners, over 50 guests. My mother cried tears of joy as she handed him the keys to a brand new BMW. Matt received similar treatment, even more impressive because he was the first in the family to be accepted into an Ivy League school. When I graduated high school, they tossed a store-bought cake on the kitchen counter. No party, no gifts, just a dismissive, well, it's not like you're going to college anyway, right? That was the moment I realized I was never the son they were proud of, just the one they expected to work, contribute, and never ask for anything in return. Back to the present, with my phone lighting up with a text from my mother. You're so selfish and cruel, after everything we've done for you. So that's how they saw it. I was the selfish one. I was the cruel one. I suddenly saw the hypocrisy of it all. I put the phone down and went back to my workbench at the garage. My shift wasn't over, and unlike them, I had responsibilities I couldn't dump on someone else. That night, my father called. I stared at his name flashing on the screen. He never called me unless he needed something. I let the phone ring twice before answering. Jacob, he said, his voice tense, what's going on? I wiped my hands on a rag, leaving the grease and oil stains on it. I'm not sure what you mean. Your mother is freaking out. She had to Uber to the grocery store today. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was for her? I almost laughed. She could have used my old pickup truck, the one I'd used to get to work for years. Oh wait, they'd made me sell it to help pay Matt's tuition when his scholarship wasn't enough. Don't start, he snapped when he heard my snort. Why did you stop paying? I took a slow breath, trying to keep calm. Because it's not my car, and because I'm done being used. Silence. Then, smaller, we always expected more from you. Part of me wanted to snap, wanted to scream, wanted to finally tell him exactly what I thought of how they'd treated me my entire life. But instead, I smiled to myself and said, yeah, well, I expected more from you too, and then I hung up. After that call, all was silent. No texts, no calls, no fake apologies, nothing. But I knew my family. Their silence wasn't surrender, it was a storm gathering strength. For years, I had been the one keeping them afloat, and they were content with that as long as I stayed in my place. But the moment I broke free, the moment I showed them I wouldn't be their personal ATM anymore, that's when they panicked. Fine, I thought. If they wanted to play the silent game, I'd play along. I was used to being ignored. But on day 10 after their car was repossessed, Matt texted me. Happy now? Mom's been crying for days. You're disgusting. I ignored it. The next morning, another text. Let's talk, like adults. My father. Like adults? I had to smile at the irony. As if they'd ever treated me like an adult. As if they hadn't treated me like a mobile ATM with a heart they could crush whenever they wanted. I ignored the text. But 3 days later, they made their next move. I received a notification from my bank, $2,500 withdrawn from my account. I checked my statement, heart racing. My mother had used my credit card to pay her medical bills. She hadn't asked, hadn't warned me, just simply taken it. Because they knew. They knew I wouldn't let them starve. They knew I wouldn't let my own mother go without health care. They knew I was responsible. What they didn't know. I wasn't their safety net anymore. The next morning, I walked into the bank as soon as they opened. I canceled every automatic payment linked to my account. I blocked every access point they had. I closed the credit card my mother had used and disputed that medical charge. Within hours, the money was back in my account. But I wasn't done. When I got home, I opened my small safe and took out a document I'd kept for years, a contract my parents had once convinced me to sign. The house they lived in was in my name. They'd been drowning in debt years ago. To save themselves, they'd refinanced the house using my credit, promising they would be responsible for the payments. They hadn't been. I was the one who had made every payment, and now they thought they could steal from me? I signed a single piece of paper. I put their house up for sale. The funny thing is, my parents had 2 other sons making more than enough money to help them, but did they? Not a chance. The rich don't share. David and Matt both had 6-figure salaries. They drove brand new cars, lived in luxury apartments, and vacationed in Europe, but when it came to helping our parents, suddenly they were broke. I've got my own bills, man. Money's tight these days. Maybe Jacob can cover it, he's good with money. They knew why I was good with money, because I had no choice. I was the one who'd skipped meals in my 20s so I could send extra money to my parents. I was the one who'd fix their home when something broke. I was the one who'd put my life on hold so they wouldn't drown in debt. And now they dared to steal from me? That was my breaking point. I stared at the house listing on my laptop. When the paperwork went through, they would get an eviction notice. Maybe they'd call me. Maybe they'd yell, threaten, beg. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, I was putting myself first. I remember the first time they took advantage of me. I was 15 when my parents first took money from me. I'd had a part-time job at a gas station, nothing fancy, but it was my first real taste of financial independence. I remember getting my first paycheck. It wasn't much, but to me, it was a fortune. I had plans for that money, maybe a few new clothes, maybe savings for a car, but I never got the chance. My mother was waiting for me when I got home, arms crossed. Hand it over, I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. You live here, don't you? You eat the food we buy, use the electricity we pay for. It's time you contributed. My father nodded in agreement. You don't want to be a freeloader, do you? So I handed over my first paycheck, then my second, then my third. By the time I was 18, giving my parents money wasn't even a question anymore, it was an expectation. And the worst part? They never took a dime from David or Matt. When I put the house up for sale, I expected an immediate reaction, a barrage of calls, threats, pleas, but at first, there was nothing. I checked my phone every few hours, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Instead, the silence stretched on. It unnerved me. For years, my family had never hesitated to blow up my phone when they needed money. If the internet went out, they called me. If Dad's truck had a flat tire, they called me, but when I put their entire house up for sale, nothing. I should have known they were planning something. 3 days after listing the house, I finally got a call, not from Mom, not from Dad, but from David. I let it ring, then listened to the voicemail. "Jacob, you need to call me back right now. This is serious." Oh, now it was serious? I ignored it. Then Matt tried, then my father. By the 5th call, my curiosity won out. I answered. "Jacob," my father's voice was tense, controlled, "we need to talk." I remained silent. "You put the house up for sale," he continued, as if I didn't know. "Yes," I said. "I did." A sharp intake of breath. "Why would you do that? Are you really that angry over a Christmas gift?" I almost laughed. "You stole from me," I said flatly. "Again, it was for your mother's medical bills," he snapped. "She's sick, Jacob, but of course, you wouldn't care about that, would you?" I clenched my jaw. "If she's sick, why aren't David and Matt paying anything?" Silence. Then, weaker, "They have their own expenses." "And I don't?" I asked, "or do my bills not count because I was never allowed to have a life outside of being your personal ATM?" More silence. "Jacob," he said after a long pause, his voice softer, "if you do this, if you sell the house, we'll have nowhere to go." I waited for the guilt to hit. It didn't, because I knew the truth. They could go plenty of places. David had a 4-bedroom house with a guest room. Matt had a luxury apartment with a spare room, but neither of them was willing to take my parents in because the rich don't share. "Then that's your problem," I said, and hung up. The next day, my mother called. I wasn't sure what to expect, tears, screaming. It was both. "You ungrateful child," she shouted, "how could you do this to us after everything we've done for you?" I put the phone on speaker and went back to fixing a carburetor. "You stole from me," I reminded her. "You owe us," she shot back. "We raised you, we fed you. You think that comes for free?" I wiped grease from my hands, sighing. "Mom, did you ever make David or Matt pay rent?" She hesitated. "Did they ever have to pay for bills?" I pressed. Another pause. "You were always the responsible one," she finally said, her voice faltering. "We knew we could count on you." "Yeah," I muttered. "You could." I hung up. The house sold within 2 weeks. The market was hot, received an offer above asking price. I didn't tell them. I let them find out the hard way when the eviction notice arrived. That's when they really lost it. David showed up at my workplace, furious. "You're really letting us get evicted?" he demanded. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I kept working. "I have a place at my place," he sneered. "I'm not letting them move in with me." "That's not my problem." "That's exactly the problem," I said, finally looking up. "You make 6 figures and can't help, but you expect me to go bankrupt to keep them comfortable?" He had no answer to that, so he left. My parents eventually moved to a small rental house, nothing fancy, nothing they were used to. Matt and David helped with part of the rent, but not all of it, because the rich don't share. I heard through the grapevine that they were miserable, complaining about the neighborhood, complaining about the cramped space, complaining that I had betrayed them. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care. I was free. 6 months have passed since I sold the house. 6 months of freedom. I no longer check my phone expecting demands for money. I no longer wake up to overdraft notifications because someone borrowed from me without asking. For the first time in my life, I'm living for myself and my family. They're suffering, not in the way you might think. They're not homeless, they're not starving, but they're not comfortable, and for people like them, that's worse than any real hardship. They've had to budget for the first time in their lives. My mother had to find a part-time job to help with rent. My father sold his truck and now drives a beater. And David and Matt? They're facing a reality they were never prepared for, a reality where I'm not there to pick up the slack for them. A year after the car repossession incident, I decided to give them one last chance. It was Mother's Day, and as expected, Matt and David had made reservations at a fancy restaurant, the kind of place where a steak costs more than I used to make in a day. They invited me, not because they missed me, but because they needed someone to split the bill. I almost declined, but then I had an idea. I arrived 10 minutes late, not by accident, but by design. My mother looked delighted when I walked in, not because she was happy to see me, but because for a moment she thought I had crawled back. "Jacob," she gasped, placing a hand on her chest as if she was seeing me for the first time in years. "I knew you wouldn't abandon your family forever." I forced a polite smile. Happy Mother's Day. David and Matt exchanged looks. They knew something was off. We ordered food. They talked about their jobs, their investments, their struggle to find good house help. No one asked about me, not once. Finally, the bill came. My mother pushed it toward me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Jacob, she said sweetly, since you're doing so well nowadays, why don't you take care of this? I leaned back in my chair, studying their faces. David wouldn't make eye contact. Matt was grinning as if he was in on some private joke, and my mother? She looked smug, as if she'd won, as if selling the house, cutting them off, and standing up for myself had just been a phase, and now I was back where I belonged, their wallet. I smiled, reached into my pocket, pulled out my card, then burst out laughing, loud enough that the table next to us turned to stare. My mother's smile wavered. Jacob? I wiped a fake tear from my eye, still grinning. Oh my God, you really think? I shook my head. No, Mom, I'm not paying. Silence. David looked shocked. Matt scowled, and my mother, her face twisted with anger. But it's Mother's Day. She sputtered. I lifted my napkin, dabbed my mouth, and stood up. Yeah, and I already gave you your gift. What? She snapped. Your independence. Then I walked out. I never spoke to them again. I blocked their numbers, moved to a new city, got a new job that paid better and gave me time to actually live. I traveled, bought a car, opened a savings account just for me. For the first time in my life, my money is mine, not Matt's, not David's, not my parents'. And them? Last I heard, my mother had to find a part-time job to help with rent. My father sold his truck and now drives a beater. David and Matt? They still make six figures, still travel, but somehow, when it comes to taking care of my parents, suddenly their money isn't so easy to come by because the rich don't share. Additional section. Early lesson. I was 12 the first time I learned what being a family really meant. Matt's birthday was coming up, and my mother wanted to buy him a new gaming console, but money was tight. She pulled me down in the kitchen. Jacob, she said sweetly, you love your brother, don't you? I nodded. Of course I did. Then you wouldn't mind giving up your allowance this month, would you, so we can buy him a gift? I hesitated. But what about my birthday? My mother laughed as if it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. Oh, honey, she said, patting my head, your birthday isn't as important as his. And that's the moment I realized some people are born to take, and some people are born to give, unless they decide to change the rules. 1 year later. I sat in my apartment, watching the sunset fall over the city. My phone buzzed. A new number. I hesitated, answered. Jacob? It was Matt. I said nothing. He sighed. Mom's been asking about you. I raised an eyebrow. Mom, or Mom's bank account? A long pause. I chuckled. Yeah, that's what I thought. Come on, little brother, he tried again, it's been a year. Family is family. I thought about that for a second, then I smiled. Not my family. I hung up, and for the first time in my life, I felt free. 2 weeks later, I received an email from my bank. The mortgage on my parents' rental house was overdue, meaning Matt and David weren't paying it as they said they would, meaning they were the ones letting my parents struggle, not me, not the selfish one. I forwarded that email to Matt, no message, just evidence. Then I turned off my phone, leaned back, and enjoyed the peace of knowing for the first time, it wasn't my problem anymore. Responses to readers. I knew this story would get attention, but I didn't expect this reaction. First, thank you to everyone who took the time to read and comment. Some of you really get it. Others, well, let's just say I have a few things to address. 1. You're heartless, they're still your family. Oh, I know they're my family, trust me. Every time my check disappeared into their bank account, every time I was treated like a second-class citizen while my brothers bathed in gifts, I was very aware they were my family. The issue is, family should be a two-way street. If I ever needed help, do you think they would be there? Not a chance, they'd call me irresponsible and tell me to figure it out myself. So no, I don't feel guilty. If anything, I feel liberated. 2. You could have handled it better. Why so extreme? Could I have? Sure, I could have sat them down, had a long talk, tried to set boundaries. Oh wait, I did that for years, and each time they either laughed in my face, ignored me, or made me feel guilty for wanting basic respect. The only language they understand is consequences. 3. Why don't your wealthy brothers help more? Good question. Wish I had the answer. Oh wait, I do. The rich don't share. David and Matt have more than enough to cover everything, but why would they? They had a perfect system. As long as I kept paying, they never had to. The moment I stopped, they had to step up, and guess what? They didn't want to. 4. You could have just cut them off instead of selling the house. Maybe, but here's the thing, it wasn't just about money, it was about control. As long as they had that house, they had something to hold over my head. They would find ways to guilt me back. Selling it wasn't revenge, it was cutting the umbilical cord. 5. I bet they crawled back. Oh, they tried. The moment their bills started piling up, Matt called me twice a week and acted like we were best friends. Then David sent a Christmas card, which is hilarious since they never cared about holidays unless I was paying for them. And my mother? She had the audacity to text me on my birthday, the first birthday in years where I didn't have to buy my own cake. I didn't reply. Final thoughts. Would I do it again? Absolutely. For the first time in my life, I have peace. I have money in an account that belongs to me. I travel. I buy things for myself and my new family, friends who actually care about me for who I am, not what I can give them. Just last week, I went on a weekend trip to the beach with a group of friends. We rented a small house, grilled on the beach, and drank cheap beer under the moonlight. No one asked me about money. No one expected me to pay for everything. We split costs evenly, and when I slipped and fell into the ocean with my phone in my pocket, ruining it, they laughed and hugged me instead of scolding me for carelessness. That's real family. My old family's suffering? That's someone else's problem now. I've learned that sometimes you have to put yourself first, especially when no one else will do it for you. So, to everyone reading this and thinking, maybe I should stop letting my toxic family take advantage of me, let me tell you this, you don't owe them anything, not money, not time, not your peace. Choose yourself. You'll never regret it. Update after 2 years. It's actually been over 2 years since I wrote the original post. A lot of changes have happened that I thought some of you might be interested in. First, Matt finally had to face responsibility and moved my parents into his spare apartment. 13 days later, he rented another apartment for them and restored his privacy. Turns out living with them wasn't as easy as he thought. David still helps them financially, but from what I heard through a cousin, he's been losing his temper as the medical bills continue to pile up. He actually mentioned that I handled these things better. I guess taking responsibility isn't easy when you're used to having a brother to dump everything on. And me? I met an amazing woman named Elena. She's an engineer, an actual engineer, not the kind my parents thought I wasn't smart enough to become. We've been dating for a year, and I think she might be the one. She gets me, respects my boundaries, and has never seen me as a walking wallet. Of course, my mother tried to reach out on my birthday last year. I love you, Jacob, she texted. It's sad that you're not part of the family anymore. I read the message 3 times, wondering if there was any apology in there. There wasn't. Whoever said time heals all wounds probably was never financially exploited for 30 years. But I'm not bitter anymore. I've moved past it. I have a good job, an amazing girlfriend, and actual savings. Last week, Elena and I booked a vacation to Hawaii. That's right, Hawaii. We're staying a week at a 5-star resort. We'll go snorkeling, hike a volcano, and lie on the beaches I once dreamed of taking my family to. But this time, I'm going with my real family. And I don't even have to pay all the bills. Because sometimes you really can have a happy ending. You just have to be brave enough to write it for yourself. Thank you all for reading.